us again, having seen you over the years play such a driving force role in helping this Sustainable Development Goals get created. What we wanted to do in this session was really catch up with you and on how you are thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals and where we go from here, given this really quite unexpected and terribly severe crisis that we're going through at the moment, and particularly how we as a community of social entrepreneurs, can help with the challenges that lie ahead and the potential for greater partnership with the UN system. As you know, Amina, Catalyst 2030 launched a report earlier today called From Crisis to Systems Change, and we know you've been sent an early copy of that. So a bit later on, I might ask you about your reactions to the ideas in that report, which reflect a lot of recommendations from this community. But I really wanted to start by asking you, how are you processing what's going on at the moment in terms of the crisis and what this does to the Sustainable Development Goal agenda that the world embraced back in 2015, which seems a lifetime ago right now?
Thank you, Matthew, and for having me on, and thank you to the community of Catalyst. I think it's a wonderful idea, and we've seemed to have turned this engagement around on a sixpence, and it's great to see the report out in such fast time. And I think everything now is emergency mode, and we're in this new virtual reality. In January, we were getting set to begin the decade of action to get to the SDGs, knowing fully well that the meeting in September last year concluded that we were off track, and we really needed to do an awful lot to get back on track. And so when COVID came in and put a pause on the world, it was a moment of truth as to how prepared the UN was to try to support countries, communities, partnerships, not to pause, because climate change had certainly not paused. Poverty had certainly not paused. So things were going on in addition to COVID, which was really just sort of bearing open many of the issues that we should have addressed and would have been better off in health and education and water and sanitation to deal with. So a real crisis, uncharted waters. We were suddenly giving lockdown instructions to try to suppress COVID and the side effects of that. So the treatment for it, the side effects were, of course, the socioeconomic impact. And that seemed to be making landfall in developing countries long before the same level of crisis of COVID that was happening in the North. So truly a global problem that needed a global response, solidarity. For us in the United Nations on three fronts: the humanitarian, the health, and the socioeconomic, trying to pull this together and to make sure voices, and that what we did with this crisis, it has such a human face on it, is to turn it into an opportunity. And that's really why I think this discussion is going to be quite exciting. It's a lot of young people who are forward thinking, and I will tell you what I think about some of your report in the course of this discussion. But from a place of where we were off track to getting on track to seeing COVID as the opportunity to leapfrog many of the issues, because in trying to respond and recover better to COVID, we should be really grabbing the opportunities.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're still retaining your optimism in the situation, and I think you must be under a lot of pressure to figure out a path forward with the UN General Assembly going virtual, I think in September this year. What are you looking for, over the next few months in terms of meetings of leaders, in terms of how they can show that they've retained some optimism and are actually going to do something to get us to a more optimistic place?
Matthew, what the commodity the UN has, and I hope that this is what we convene for, is hope. And we constantly have to be hopeful, optimistic, and trying to lead and look for those pathways forward, and not to get dragged down into what is a very real challenge and crisis in people's lives, individually and otherwise. And we found that with this global crisis, that leadership has struggled around the world, and finding themselves in uncharted water has left us with trying to convene to bring leaders together to show that leadership both inside and externally in the partnerships. And it's been quite hard. We've recognized that in the north of our world, that economies have been taken by surprise. and that they are, as for want of a better word, putting the oxygen mask on their face, and we're saying, okay, now help others. And this has not happened at the scale and the response at which we expected. However, having said that, we are engaging with, constituencies like the G20, the G7, bringing them together, and what the SG has done in terms of trying to keep the optimism, the hope, and the ambition alive for what we need in a global response, economically and otherwise, is to convene. And we have convened more recently over 50 heads of state on the finance. How do you get a financial response to countries around the world that is equal? That you can put together overnight $1 trillion package, stimulus package in one country, and cannot do the same that is talking about millions to billions, not even trillions, is really it's not possible for us to succeed with seeing the end of COVID. It's clear that wherever we have COVID, it means we've got it everywhere. So we've got to have that global response. So we are convening in different spaces to try to keep these issues alive. This is one opportunity that we take both globally and locally. We are producing a number of policy briefs which we think bring together the issues for COVID. And these have been on mental health, on gender-based violence, disabilities, water, jobs, which are really important right now. And it would be interesting to see if we couldn't actually bring one up on social entrepreneurship.
Great. And as you have these convenings, do you feel that the leaders that you're bringing together, that there is starting to be a mind shift, that they are starting to realize that this is that there is no going back to normal, and that this crisis has to either be seized as a leapfrog moment, or it's just going to really get very, very bad indeed, and we'll lose all hope of getting the SDG agenda and the progress that implies?
We're hearing many leaders who are leaning forward, acknowledging the crisis we're in and what we need to do. But there is a gap between what we're saying and what we're doing. And I think, we discussed yesterday as we were preparing for the Food Systems Summit next year, that there is enough food in the world for everyone. It's just not being accessed where it needs to be. So too much in some places, not enough in others. It's the same with financial resources to allow us to respond and recover. We do have the resources, but the ability to access those resources, there is inertia in the international community with our leaders to try to make that happen. Now, maybe this will change in a couple of days' time when the G20 meets, the finance ministers meet, and we see what comes out of that. It is a broad-based representation of where we need to see things move. But as I said, our job is to band together with other voices, amplifying the need for urgency and scale.
Yes, I mean, that G7 meeting is very key, I think, in terms of the finance ministers. And we hear a lot about the trillions of dollars that are being mobilized, apparently in the headlines, but in preparing this report, the feedback we were getting from all our communities on the ground is that very little of that money seems to be trickling down. And I don't know, what do you think tangibly would signal that might change from these meetings of G7, G20 and so on?
I think we have to keep calling out where we have committed. We've made the promise. It's been a good start. We've seen that from the IMF. We've seen that from the World Bank. But if it hasn't landed, it hasn't landed. The best will in the world, if the promises we make don't land and we don't disperse these resources and get them to where it's needed, then it becomes a problem. However, having said that, when they do land, what happens with those resources? Because this is also an opportunity for national governments to repurpose the way they're looking at this response and taking up the opportunity for laying foundations in that recovery. Example that I would give is that this is the one time that you talk about helping the informal sector migrate to digital platforms, as we've seen in Latin America. It's one opportunity where education that cannot be reached, going online, would be an opportunity to scale that up so that you never go back the day after. Going back to school becomes different and more accessible. That we're seeing water and sanitation not be treated as an emergency, but really as a part of infrastructure in our cities and in our local areas. So it's two sides to this. We have to follow the money, or follow the promise, I would say. And on the other side, if it does land, follow it. And how can we help to shape a better use of it?
Great. So I'm asking people who've joined this call to actually put their questions into the chat format, and we'll come to those questions in a few minutes. I just want to, ask from your point of view, I mean, you obviously before COVID had put in place this structure to have much more coordinated policies at a national level. Just how is that working? How can that be a tool for actually getting some of that work on the ground done that you were mentioning?
Well, what the Secretary General came in doing a couple of years ago was actually to say we've got this incredible roadmap and framework of the Agenda 2030 and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but is the UN system itself fit for purpose? Do we have the right response, skill sets, partnerships on the ground to carry what is essentially a huge paradigm shift for putting a Band-Aid on issues to actually talking about economies and how inclusive they can be, growing in a way that they would pay for those of you that know the goals 1 to 6, which really were the unfinished business of the MDGs. And so I think now what we have on the ground is yes, the UN has been really good at coming together. We've seen the lift on the response in health. Our frontline workers in the humanitarian area, in health, in many of our rural areas have been able to answer the call on COVID. However, on the socioeconomic impact, very quickly we had to put a framework together to put development in emergency mode, which we have not done before. A bit like what you've done with this report. How fast you were able to get that out is because actually we do know what the problems are and we have many answers to the solutions. It's to stand it up and operationalize it. So, you know, bringing this all together at country level is a framework that has 5 clusters. It's a real focus on saying, let's make sure we keep business going in addition to addressing COVID. So your health systems will have to deal with maternal mortality. They will have to deal with many of the issues that we have around already the vaccine campaigns. They will have to deal with providing water and education. Keep that going as well as, and how do you help within the stimulus packages of governments to do that? The second is really to look at the jobs. Many jobs are being lost because of the lockdown, and we're trying to find a balance between not having to choose either or, but to protect people as well as keep those livelihoods going. With cash transfers, with, as I said, attending to small and medium scale businesses. We've also said a better understanding of how the macroeconomic space works, that you can engage with, for instance, social entrepreneurs, finding the financial tools and access to these resources to help them do things at the grassroots level. And that's sort of one of the clusters which says, how can we become more resilient? How can we become more community engaged and strengthen the institutions that need to support that? So I think at the country level, with our country teams and our partners, we are moving quite fast for a system that over the years, we look at development with trajectories of 10 to 15 years. Now we have to do this in weeks and months. And I think in this last few months, we've actually seen, perhaps of the 131 countries that the UN is in, the response of over 70 with plans and engaging local community.
I think one of the things that's come through, very clearly in this crisis, which I think was part of the thinking behind the Sustainable Development Goals, was that no country is developed, and in fact the ones that we thought so apparently most prosperous are suffering perhaps the most severe, in some ways, vulnerabilities. Do you think that message is getting across? I mean, obviously there's one country where some messages are very hard to get across to the leadership, but in most of the world, are you starting to see a greater realization in what we used to call the developed world, that they need to view this as an opportunity to expand their global engagement and make sure that the global system is more robust and resilient, as well as addressing those at home?
I think it's been very clear to people that we are one human family. If this has shown anything, it is that we are one human family, but with different levels of capabilities, abilities, inequalities, and it is now a global issue. Inequality in the United States has been bared open on a number of fronts, whether it is age specific, and we saw the elderly who did not have access. We see poorer communities that have not, when they've had access to health, unfortunately have been those that have been on the tragic end of losing their lives than other communities have. And when you look at that, you can see the demographics of not as good education, not as good living facilities or access to health. So it's sort of a story of the South, coming to rest in the North. It is happening everywhere, and yet with so many resources available here, one wonders, in fact, what has happened with the policy making that should have been as inclusive, should have been as representative in countries like this. More recently, again, you know, the whole protests around racism and discrimination has opened up another issue of what seems to be systemic. And so it's not a quick fix. This is going to happen over generations. For me, the most optimistic and exciting thing about this crisis is that it's showing us that now is the time for that intergenerational transition. Whether we like it or not, we are moving in a new direction with the largest cohort of young people. And we better be listening and not just putting them at the table. They need to be in positions of leadership. And that doesn't mean leaving them alone. That just means that we have to partner with them in a different way and communicate, listen, and begin to communicate and collaborate. And as you have spoken to co-creating, get this job done.
Yes, I mean, I think that co-creation message is one of the key things that came through from all the conversations within Catalyst 2030 preparing this report. And I think one particular frustration that came to the surface that, you know, I think we're all hoping can be addressed is that the social entrepreneur community, you know, some of the people in Catalyst 2030 were involved in the consultations around creating the SDGs themselves, but there isn't a formal representation of social entrepreneurs in the system, and at the moment they either appear as NGOs or you know, as businesses, but that distinct, innovative, you know, connection with communities on the ground that that social entrepreneurs bring, you know, how do we get that voice better heard in the system? And I'm intrigued to know what you think of the you know, recommendations or you know, requests that are in the report on that front about how we get better engaged, better presence at the table.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first of all, seeing the frame of the 2030 agenda in a very serious light, and not as everything we say that is social seems to be relegated to the background. When we have gone in to have a discussion on resources that are needed to respond to COVID and thereafter, it's strange that, you know, this is not UN business. This is a business of the bank and the IMF. Well, you know, wake up and smell the roses. It is the business of the UN because it speaks for everyone and convenes everybody around critical issues that we took 4 years to agree. So I think, you know, we have to take the SDGs much more seriously than we have done. We have to understand them. It's not about hanging on to a goal. If you hang on to the gender goal, gender equality, I would say that then becomes the docking station from all else. Now, we don't fully understand how to make this, how to lift the Sustainable Development Agenda, and I hope that we will do better at embedding that at the country level. For me, the social entrepreneurship and its arrival is for now, it's come of its time. How do you position it so that it is taken seriously and is not just thought of as a do-good effort? It's about understanding better what social entrepreneurship means. And it is 2 words like multilateralism and like, you know, the words that we use in the UN, don't complicate it. How do we demystify this and really connect it with economy? How do we connect it with empowerment, with young leadership, communicating it better? Does it have a hook in the UN? Probably through much of our work. Does it have an envoy, or does it have an agency that looks out for it? No, it doesn't. But does it need it? I'm not sure. For the envoy, I'm quite excited about that, and I think, well, you know, we should give some thought to it and take that back to the SG. But in terms of the hook in the UN system, so that you can gain the opportunity of the convening space that we have and the wealth of knowledge to help use and we shape the tools that could be used outside. There is the UN Office of Partnerships and how they think as the gateway to the UN of promoting social entrepreneurship, amplifying it and getting into the UN. I think that's a conversation that we could have and that we should have. The UN Global Compact. How does the UN Global Compact that has over 40,000 businesses with it deal with this? And under the new leadership of a young African woman who has come from the tech business, maybe this is a really good time to have that discussion with her as well. So this is beginning, and I think that it's got some pretty strong roots. As I said, I'm really encouraged by the first report that you've had, you know, looking back, hindsight is 2020 vision, but this launch in Davos was, you know, an amazing idea to try to get this out. Now's the time to begin to root what we should use to recover in leaps and bounds 2021 going forward. I think this is what is going to help us hang together in economies that are going to have transition, very rocky transitions back to where they were post COVID and then more. If we don't have this, then I think then it's not such a good picture. But you know, how to see social entrepreneurship, the informal sector, and the formal sector all coming together.
So, I mean, you clearly get it. You get what social entrepreneurs bring to this challenge. But how far do you think that is shared across UN leadership and also in national governments and so forth? And is there anything you're able to do as an advocate to make sure that we can have those conversations that we're talking about? I know you know that Giroux will be on your case, having said what you've just said, to make sure that we get proper introductions to the various people that need to be we need to talk with. But and I share your excitement about the appointment of the Global Compact as well. But I think is that something that you see the system is ready to engage much more with social entrepreneurs?
Well, first I would say, by and large, we don't have a general idea of what this is all about. And if we do, we don't give it the priority, perhaps, of the opportunity. I'm not, you know, a lot of things are prioritized, but the opportunity of social entrepreneurship is not understood as well as it should be. And I think that that's an opening for us to have. And so we should be engaging. What's your best point of engagement? It's not New York. New York's great, and we understand the point of engagement should be in every one of the RC's offices, our resident coordinator offices in 131 countries. And how are they going to help to make sure that they convene for spaces that you cannot get into right now? We can convene government, we can convene parliaments if there's a law that's needed, and bring people to the table. So the opportunity of us finally taking notice and putting this as a priority within the framework of our social economic response and recovery, I think is first. And so this meeting for me, I will be making sure that our leadership within the RC system that we're responsible for directly does that. You know, see where we go from there on the UN side. But beyond the UN side, I think that there is, you know, we do need to create a space where in society we're discussing this opportunity of social entrepreneurship that is not just about the bottom line. It's about putting people and our environments at the center of what we do. The business models that are created today, co-created today, provide that opportunity for a new world, a new era of engagement with our possibilities and aspirations.
Great. I'm starting to sort of move towards the questions that have been coming in, and there's a question from Simon and Jane Berry, which is really around, you know, what are the key elements of the UN strategy to catch up on the SDGs, and do you see any low-hanging fruit?
Every time I hear low-hanging fruit, it's just to remind everyone there are no quick fixes to this. I mean, that's exactly what we're arguing, right? That, you know, we don't want the band-aids. And they're usually seen as low-hanging fruits. If there was to be a low-hanging fruit, it would be, how do we convene to have more access to what's happening with domestic resources right now? In this 6 months, many countries are going to have additional resources to spend. And is there a way that we can interrupt that usual spend in order to find a new way of reaching communities and expanding opportunities for young people and social entrepreneurs? So I would say that's one low-hanging fruit that the UN can actually help with by making sure it's on the agenda of ministers of finance as they look to see how they disperse additional resources as they fill their fiscal gaps. So I think there is one place there. It's difficult. It's not the usual space we find ourselves in. I think in the programming that we have the programming that we have in the UN, we're also collaborating with the EU, with the World Bank, with you know, other bilaterals, that we also begin to introduce that into the checklist of an opportunity. If you look at the clusters that we are dealing with, do you see the word social entrepreneurship? No. Do you see the word dealing with, you know, informal sector and women and young people? Yes. So how do you define that in a more formal way and connect it to the community that you have? That's what I would say is two perhaps entry points. Is getting into our business, which should be your business. And in the second one, connecting with government.
Yeah, and I think, but building on that point, there's a question from David Lubell, which is around local government. And I think many of the social entrepreneurs, are primarily dealing at a local level with communities on the ground. And local government is the most visible force of government, the face of government that is seen. How does the UN and UN system get these messages out to the local government about how the role that they can play, so that we can have better alliances with local governments to advance the innovations promoted in this report and the SDGs more generally?
More recently, 2030 Local has been about us actually reaching to the local government, in the local government space, but also the city space, because this is where we see lots of opportunity for innovation and for growth of a constituency like this. But it's very difficult because for years there's been a lack of investment in those institutions, and engaging with them. They are probably the weakest link in government, if we'd say, and that's tragic, because if you don't have a strong local level, then it's unlikely that you can build any walls or a roof on this. So I think work here is to build those capacities, and perhaps in this way, again, I'm going to go back to the emphasis on co-creation. We cannot just be speaking across the table past each other. We've got to find the space to say, well, what is it that you need institutionally to support what you would like to do? What are those gaps? And to see how we can fill them for government, for cities. And the UN is prepared to do that. And within these frameworks that we're looking for resources for governments that we could do. The other side of it, of course, is the social entrepreneurs who will need support to stand up many of the businesses that they have, or even to find places where you have innovation labs that you can co-create the ideas that could go to scale, starting from local governments and scaling up. I think it's a new space, but I think mapping who are the key players that are needed to really bring alive a strong and robust social entrepreneurship is what's needed. And I don't think we quite know that yet. I think we're still working in silos. So we need to work across and to bring all the partners in as equals with a result that everyone is happy about. I mean, local governments want revenues, people want jobs, businesses want to grow. And this is all, I think, brings in, I think, possibilities and opportunities that will deal with other issues. I mean, if I look at the lockdown and I look at what's happening on gender-based violence, on mental health, on exclusion, this is a remedy for it. If we invest in strengthening institutions and supporting local business, I think this is one way that we will be able to deal with the root causes of the other, instead of putting a band-aid on all of them.
And in the spirit of talking about co-creation, obviously the SDGs themselves was, I think, probably the first time at a global level you saw this kind of co-creation with at least some private sector representation at the table. What do you see as the way to build on that platform to really take co-creation to a much deeper and more effective level?
The co-creation piece is happening really well amongst young people and those who are forward-looking to try to find the solutions to what is, a clear challenge and reality at the local level, sometimes even, at the country level, maybe at national level. What is not so, the collaboration amongst leaders. Everybody's about their space and their mandate. And that doesn't matter whether you're in government or in the private sector, or it's about elbowing people out rather than seeing that collaboration actually could be, as they say, you get a bigger pie, and so you can share that. This fear of it being not enough, I think, is something that we have to break. We have to break that narrative and to show that through collaborative leadership, underneath you take profit of this co-creation, and you can get bigger and better at the response that you need. You can do it at scale. I worry that, we still stay in little groups and pilots, and we never get to the scale that we need to respond. So on many issues, we're sort of flatlining. The same number of kids are out of school, the same number of people not accessing health are the same for a decade. So it needs to be jump started, and I think the collaborative leadership that is needed across constituencies, once you get it right even within, is something that we all need to work on. It's a challenge that we've had in the reform of the United Nations, is that we have I have about 44 funds, programs, and agencies. It's the first time we've seen them really pull in the same direction and come together with this crisis. Before that, it was a huge struggle. And again, you know, I think we need to speak to the people that finance these opportunities, that they don't finance silos, that they don't just finance a flag that we put in the ground, that this is this social entrepreneur, or this is this government, or this is this agency in the UN, that we need to see, you know, funding also help us to engender the collaboration, the co-creation that's needed for us to do.
Great. I'm mindful of your time, and we have just a few minutes left. We're very grateful for it. And I want to give Giroux a chance in a moment to ask any question that she might have. But I want to quickly put to you the question we had in from Bruno Conte, and you mentioned some of the issues around your protest about racial injustice that have been spreading around the world at the moment. So the question from Bruno is, you talked about giving voice to young leaders and support them towards new narratives and solutions. In this context, could you please tell us a bit about decolonization and how the UN works to bring young people of color to the leadership level?
Well, I mean, the first thing that we've done is deeply rooted in what we believe, the charter and the values that we hold are to make sure that everyone is equal. It is about we the people, regardless of race or color or culture, religion. And the most recent thing that we've done in response to this is to try to see how internally the UN is seeing racism within its ranks. Unfortunately, no one is excluded from this scourge. What are we doing about it? Having a conversation, first of all, and trying to promote that youth take the leadership in that, and that we bring together those voices that have been, unfortunately touched by these experiences, and to see how we can do better in the institution, but also how we can do better in the work that we do promoting, an end to social injustice, racial injustice across the world. So there is a 1-year conversation that's going to take place, and that we are just right now in the moment of just what's the big challenge? Even the process of that 1 year must be agreed, because inclusion and hearing people's voices has got to be more than the talk. The day after that discussion, what happens? We have to follow through. We cannot possibly, as they say, the tragedy of George Floyd has got us all up and thinking about this individually and collectively. And it's to make sure that the work that we've done before, that we carry through. And we've seen here in the UN that there has been a lot of work that's been done, and we've been slow to carry it up and through. And this is another opportunity to make that happen. Young people are at the center of it. I'm challenging when they say, you want a seat at the table. We've got to have the youth voice. It's got to be so much more than that if we want to really see the actions carried through. We've got to have that. If you have a table now, Matthew, if you're chairing a meeting, and in that meeting, likely you have 10, 12 people, probably 1 or 2 of them will be young. The challenge is for you to step aside for that meeting and put the young person in charge for that meeting. They're not taking a job away, they're not taking the business of the system away, but you're giving them an opportunity to sit at the head of the table and to see exactly what it looks like from that perspective, and the kind of challenges that we will have to rise to. And that's giving not only voice, but position at the table to do something and experience what we ought to do. So I think we have to challenge ourselves as to, what's behind the rhetoric. And this is really difficult. This is much easier said than done. But as I said, if we don't take the opportunity of this intergenerational transition, we're going to be left behind, because young people are going to go ahead anyway. And it's either we're part of that transition or not. And I, for one, at my age with 6 kids, intend to be part of that transition.
Great. Well, Giroux, do you want to have anything that you wanted to bring to Amina's attention?
Ms. Mohammed, you've always been wonderful in taking things forward. If I know if that's one thing about you. So my only question to you would be, is there are several recommendations, and how can we work with you and your team to make them, take them forward, so that we can really mainstream the concept of social entrepreneurship and all the solutions and everything that people have. We are offering a lot. How can we make it happen at scale?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to do is to find a robust partnership with Catalyst 2030. It is a network of lots of people in there with many experiences and expertise. So how can we find of course, I want to be ambitious, the whole 131 countries that we are in, but maybe we can phase that to where you are and to begin that conversation first and foremost with our country teams of the United Nations and convene in that space, as we say, an agenda that is co-created. Let's actually do the agenda together. Many agendas for meetings are done without the participants. It's something that we just prescribe, and then you come into this room expecting to kowtow to an agenda. So let's see what we can do with that. That's the first offer. The second is we will give a consideration to whether, in fact, a person that is a flag bearer to give voice and amplify the role of social entrepreneurship in everyone's business. And I'll have that discussion with the SG and make that commitment and come back to you with what we think. And the third, of course, is both with UNOP, the UN Office of Partnerships, and the UN Global Compact, to set up at least meetings that you can have now to work out what would be or what would look like a good initiative to begin to seed and nurture and grow, not over a generation, but certainly in the next few years, to see that laid so that the decade for the SDGs becomes much more of a reality today in everyone's life, particularly at the local level, and that we're really seeing reflected every one of the SDGs in one way or another in everyone's lives. They're not imported, they're not something that's come out of nowhere. I hope that people, when they really look at the SDGs, they see themselves in achieving them individually, the goals that you are more passionate about, but collectively, if you do the SDGs, it is a much better community, it is a better country, it is a better region, it is a better world. And it's how to lift that and to include you in it. So I can make some commitments to those three pieces. What would your commitment be to me?
We'll support you in achieving the SDGs. That's our commitment.
No,
so we try to get there by 2030. Let's make them happen by 2030, not 2094.
Let's be very clear. The SDGs don't belong to me. I birthed them. You now have got to nurture and grow them. And if that's the way it is, at the end, I would love to think that as a global community, we achieve the SDGs. So long as the people think that they belong to the UN, I would say that I failed in my bid to try to help shape these over 4 years. I really hope that these belong to people and we achieve them for us, we the peoples.
Let me just build on that, what Drew was saying. And I think that two things that came through to me in watching this community work together around this report. One was, there are tremendous range of people who have got great ideas that are working on the ground, and they're now looking to collaborate much better than social entrepreneurs have ever done with each other. And I think that's a big step forward. And what I'm excited by is there's a pledge to continue doing that in the working groups that have been established over the next few months. And so you could hopefully expect more information as these ideas are developed from the different member groups of the community. The second is, though, that there is, I think, also a realization that the way that social entrepreneurs are funded is not really working very well at the moment. And I think that's the other area where I think we want to go deeper and probably come back with more proposals, and any advice you can give us and partnership with this community on figuring out a better funding model that gets money quicker to the ground where ideas are really being experimented with and scaled up would be great. So we can commit to coming back to you with some thoughts on that as well, but I'd love to hear your reactions on both those points.
Well, on the second point of the financing, incredibly important, the discussion groups around the high-level finance meeting that we had with heads of state, on one of the groups, it's about sustainability and what happens the day after. And we are looking at the financial systems. We've started a series, and maybe I can invite, if you can give me an economist that is a social entrepreneur. We've started a series of economist roundtables, and this was for women, because we found that, in fact, the forward thinking on re-engineering the financial architecture in the world came out of 5 women economists in the world who are brilliant. We brought them together last week for the first roundtable. The second roundtable will happen in a couple of months' time, which is going to focus on young economists. And it would be great to have one of your people in that, because what we take out of this is we feed it into these discussion groups because we're looking for solutions. And we know what the issues are, but you know, the solutions for that. So do that very quickly, because this year, to put this on the agenda of the September General Assembly finance ministers meeting or heads of state meeting would be really, I think would be really cool. I think this would work. The second, you know, first, I mean, I'd like to go back to, first of all, saying that what I've taken away from reading through your documents, from the discussion that I've had today, are the 5 core values that you have. I think they're really exciting. And it's, you know, sort of the youth dare to do it. That you're putting people and nature at the center of this is of course, the SDG framework, but the co-creating, the collaborative leadership. The best one I love, of course, is when you say humble audacity. I love those 2 words. I'm going to steal them from you and use them. But last but not least, the spirit of generosity. If we do not find the humanness in all of us to be generous enough to share, particularly knowledge or opportunity, we won't go very far. We are a human family that is so interconnected today that we felt this with the COVID pandemic. And so we need to leverage that and see our strength in the diversity that we have and not the weaknesses in it. Do better than the leadership that is there today, because you'll be there tomorrow. And that's what I would say to young people, and the spirit of what the SG is talking about. UN at 75 needs to be a UN that has networked multilateralism, stakeholders that have a clearly and demonstratively in the UN a voice and a seat. And I think that that's what it's going to look like going forward. And this is a great place to begin with a constituency like this that are already being humble in their audacity.
Great. Well, I think your time with us is now up, but I'd like to thank you for being so generous with the time. And I think humble, audacity are 2 words that I would always apply to you, but also add wisdom, great wisdom to that as well. And I think you've shown us what what a great leader can actually do as they think about how the world can co-create progress together. And we look forward to a very productive relationship continuing into the future with Catalyst 2030. So before you leave, I just want to say to the rest of the people who are here that we will stay on the line for about 5 minutes afterwards. So I know some of you have been asking, could we just go through the recommendations of the report and give a bit more detail about where we're taking it next. But thank you, Amina, for joining us. And I think lots of people will send thumbs up and things to you on their screen in appreciation of your time.
Well, thank you.
So
thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you so much.
Great to speak to you. And Drew, thank you so much for coming at us the way you have. And please keep fire under our feet. It's the way it should be, and we will respond favorably.
Lisa, you know I will do that. So thank you very much, and we'll be in touch. Thank you for being with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So Drew, should we just put up quickly the slide with the recommendations, and just talk through, maybe you can talk briefly about what the process is going forward with the report and what we're going to do with it to put it into, to make sure all these recommendations get into action after such a positive start to the campaign. Now it's in the public domain.
Yeah. Thanks, Matthew. Just a quick, if we can remove the slide. So this is the report cover. We are still making the final edits because people were sending edits till yesterday. So once again, thank you, Matthew, for taking all the edits in, and thank you, Christine and her team. I cut off when I was talking because we have been getting edits till the last minute, logo changes, things, so everything. So one is, given all the last minute things, Christine and her team need time at least till tomorrow to get all of these final changes in. Once they are in, we are looking at a dissemination strategy, which I put on the WhatsApp group is 3 points. So for example, we had Miss Amina Mohammed today, but before that, we've had around 5 or 6 private conversations with her team leading up to this. So we will we'll continue to have private conversations. We've started them with the OECD, we'll start them with other organizations. The second round is going to be what Sue and Project Echo have already started, which are in conversations, which are panels with experts by separate sector. So those will also continue as we are going, and they will be looked at. So those are mainly for all the 2-pagers, as we call them, or which are issue-based. So on environment, on gender, etc. And we'll have a lot of in conversations with them. And the third are the fireside chats, which we are currently still planning with the Deputy Secretary General of OECD, where we are trying to get OECD to have an MOU, which means then that we can start leveraging finance. We'll have one with the head of the UN Office of Partnerships for Finance. We'll look at other things which are also there. So there'll be a lot of this. So essentially what we want to do, please give us some time, is based on every recommendation, tally who are the people we need to contact for the recommendations. I've done this with my earlier organizations and that works best. So we'll compile all the recommendations with 1 or 2 keywords in an Excel. We've already started doing that. List who are the key stakeholders for the recommendations to get. If y'all know them, y'all reach out to them. This is especially for the issue-specific ones. For the overall ones, we will be reaching out to them. And then we will take it forward. At the next General Assembly, we'll definitely be having a dissemination strategy by recommendation. And we hope that within the year, we have been able to at least start actioning quite a few of the recommendations as a collective and making that happen. So I think these are some of the main things which are happening. Tim is already working, and I think tomorrow we have the funders meeting, which Tim has organized. So again, if you know anyone, it's late in the day, but please get in touch with Tim. So these are the main things which are happening. One last call, read through the recommendations, read through everything and make sure that everything is in order. If we have it by today evening, we can launch the report officially tomorrow with our newsletter or on Monday, depending on when we have everything in. And Christine will kill me if I don't say this because she really needs everything. Quietly sitting over here before we go. Any questions on this? Any questions on this from anyone? I'm not seeing any, but I may be wrong.
Yes, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Which version should we read?
We will put out a version tomorrow. Read that, okay? Otherwise,
well, that'll be too late for people to make changes on, though. Juru, is there one that's out there that's the latest version?
The one which I sent in the WhatsApp group is the latest version to read. What's missing in that is a mistake on our end with the logos. So don't look at the logos there. There was something which went wrong there, but otherwise, the version on the WhatsApp is the right one, other than for the logos. Okay.
And Juru, one other thing, I mean, in the
Yes,
conversation, that came up last week when we were getting feedback on the 2 pages. Can you just explain a bit about the process? Because I know some of the ideas people were saying, well, one working group is proposing something that seems to be, a little inconsistent with what another working group is proposing. How are we thinking about that over the summer?
Thank you, Matthew, for raising that. Thank you. What came up and is different people said that our recommendations are different, etc. So over the summer, we will have a theory of change for all of Catalyst, and Gurpreet, Sue, Ben, Ashok, I think Manmeet from Ashoka, different people are working on the theory of change, which will of course link to the values. So that's one work stream which is happening. Based on that, all the recommendation, all the 2 pages will be looked if the recommendations align with that, what is missing. And one big thing Janet pointed out is youth is something we really need to put in a big way. So we will put that in already as soon as possible. Amina mentioned youth so much because she still thinks I'm with child and youth finance. And that's the hat she remembers me by, in case you all are wondering. So anyway, so we will make sure that this thing happens. Theory of change over summer. And then the next thing is we look at all the recommendations, and we were also thinking if they are up to that linkage to start publishing the 2-pagers as independent pieces, and different people will look at it and have a larger consultation. So this is what is currently happening. Additionally, we have spoken to McKinsey, and we are trying to get a whole mapping exercise actually already started at the country level, and also a legal framing exercise. So these are things which are also happening. Lots is happening, folks. Sorry.
Great. So I think we're almost out of time. So I just wanted to thank everyone. I want to acknowledge that obviously we had a lot of questions that came in on the chat that we didn't get time to raise with Amina. I know, Jeru, you and the team will look through all those questions and make sure if there's anything that needs to be followed up on, that can be followed up on. I think there were a number of technical questions about people who are not being included in WhatsApp groups and so forth. So also, I guess we can provide some feedback on that and make sure that people are on the groups that they should be in, and how I guess we're going to be distributing this report through a website as well as WhatsApp and email. I guess they're all different ways of getting hold of the report once it's officially launched.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
so go ahead.
it's our birthday, huh? Tomorrow was the first day we had our first group conversation.
Great. So that's
Happy birthday.
1 year. A lot's been achieved in a year. Thank you, Jeru, again for your brilliant leadership over this period, and for everyone who's participated in getting us where we are so far, and onwards to co-create a better future together. So thank you everyone for coming today and joining us for this unofficial launch. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone. And last but not least, Miriam is sitting quietly. I want to thank Miriam again for relinking us to Amina.
Thank you,
Miriam. Thanks. Miriam and Jamie. Thanks, Miriam. Let's give her a big hand. Let's
Well done.
give Christine a big hand. And let's give Matthew a big hand. Everybody, come on, guys. Let's
Thank you, everyone.
a nice shake and a big hand to everyone who did it, and all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because we're all in this
Thank you.
together. Yoo-hoo! Thank you very much. And where's Christine, if she were there? Hey, thanks everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
very wonderful.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
CYFI team, sorry, Catalyst team, if you can stay back, please, for follow-up.
First things first.